Well, welcome everybody to the Chicago chapter of Reasons to Believe. If you're not familiar with Reasons to Believe, and I think pretty much everyone here is, but we're a faith-based organization that studies the intersection between faith and science primarily. We believe that there is no contradiction between the written word of the scripture and the general revelation of nature. And so we love to study that intersection there, as well as other topics that have to do with apologetics and logic and reason and current culture. And today we have with us a guest speaker, Alex McElroy, and this is he's a repeat speaker for us. He's a friend of Reasons to Believe, and we're happy to have him here. And Alex, I'll read a little bio for you. Alex is an author and international speaker on topics of apologetics, purpose, and leadership. He has formal training as a Christian apologist and has a master's degree from Liberty University, where he graduated with honors. He's the former pastor of education at New Life Covenant Southeast Church, which has over 20,000 members, and he currently heads the education department there. He's also working with the Fellowship of Christian Athletes and with several companies with marketplace chaplains. He's worked in a number of industries as well, including the mortgage industry, insurance and financial services, as well as in the area of energy efficiency. Alex is a husband and a father of 2 beautiful daughters. So with that, we'll go ahead and welcome Alex, and he's going to be speaking to us about discerning truth.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you for having me again. It's great to be back. Every time I think about Reasons to Believe and Dr. Hugh Ross and the team there, it's an honor just to be included to some degree with those that caliber of talent and intellect. So glad to be here again. I also realize I need to update my bio. I am no longer with Marketplace Chaplains. I am with Fellowship of Christian Athletes. I'm also a co-founding pastor of a house church called Engaged Community Church. So that's a little bit about me. Today, different than other years, I know that Reasons to Believe, as far as apologetics goes, does lean very heavily into science, but not just science. And when I was talking with Kevin, he was saying that he wanted to do something, or they were interested in doing something a little bit more on the philosophical side. I said, great, because that way I don't have to compete with Hugh Ross. So this is actually a very fundamental topic, not just to apologetics, not just to people who follow these things, the arguments made by Dr. Rana and whoever else, but underneath all of those arguments, underneath all of that evidence, is the idea of truth. If truth is not a thing, if truth is not knowable, then we don't need to be talking about any of this, right? Now, part of the problem, and I'm going to highlight today, is that people in our current society, many either don't believe there is such a thing as truth, objective truth anymore, although that's unlivable, and or have changed the criteria for what counts as true without telling the rest of us. So that's not really fair, but we're going to kind of work through this and kind of look at some, not just arguments, but look at some tools that we can have in our toolbox, so that when people do challenge us on not just Christianity, but just things that are objectively not true and not sustainable, we know we have the philosophical tools to push back. And even if you already have those young people, our younger generation is vulnerable right now. I'm a former youth pastor, and the amount of information being pumped at all of us, but definitely our young people, is just too much to sift through. And we're asking them to make the right decision every time with the quantity of information they receive. So if they don't have tools for how to discern truth and how to discern the differences between competing truth claims, then they may very well make the wrong decision. Sorry, we were minor technical difficulties, so you guys can see everything. All right. So with that being said, Dominic Barbado wrote in this article that a person in the 15th century, and I want you to think about this, a person in the 15th century would need to live their entire life to be exposed to the amount of information that the average person experiences every day. Think about that. Now, we know, and we're hopefully able to discern well enough at this age, that when we scroll through Instagram or Facebook, we don't just believe everything, right? We know how to decipher and how to sift through those things. But just think about the quantity of information. That just driving here, I saw billboards. I was listening to something on YouTube, or I was listening to the radio, or whatever it is. And then on top of that, the information we want to get, we try to read, we try to go get information, and then you put that with, at work, you're getting information, and it's all coming together, and it has to coalesce in some coherent way for us to have a proper worldview. So this is part of the obstacle, that there are simply obstacles today through our own invention, ironically. I think in some ways we've invented the tools of our demise. I guess we'll have to wait and see. But the things that we've invented, we're now suffering from. It's a whole nother talk. So I was looking up some information because in trying to kind of quantify and how to explain that first quote and the amount of information that people are exposed to, this article says, well, there's an article that talks about the zettabytes and the increase, but let me define a zettabyte first because I didn't know what that was. Maybe you did. A zettabyte is a measure of digital storage capacity. A zettabyte is read as the 2 to the 70th power bytes. It's also equal to 1,000 exabytes, 1 billion terabytes, or 1 trillion gigabytes. Simply, it would mean 1 billion 1 terabyte hard drives would be needed to store 1 zettabyte of data. I don't know if you caught all that. So it's really big. Let's just say it like that. So in this article, we're going to put that knowledge, that recent knowledge, to use. It says the total amount of data created, captured, copied, and consumed globally is forecast to increase rapidly, reaching 64.2 of those zettabytes in 2020. So we're past that. Over the next 5 years, up to 2025, global data creation is projected to grow to more than 180 zettabytes. So in 2020, the amount of data created and replicated reached a new high. The growth was higher than previously expected, obviously caused, or maybe not obviously, but caused by the increased demand due to the COVID-19 pandemic. More people are inside, more people are on their devices. Only a small percentage, though, of this newly created data is kept, though. As just 2% of the data produced and consumed in 2020 was saved. Just think about that part. So all this data we produce, it's not for any lasting purpose often. And so you think, I don't have these, but Snapchat and TikTok, they're more, quick hit type of things. But then, 5 minutes later, that's gone. You scroll, you don't see it anymore. And that amount of data is just constant, unless you turn off your phone. So these are the issues of the world that we currently live in, the world that we have currently created. And we can choose to do differently, but it doesn't seem like that's the will of the people, we'll say. So in this article, and it's dealing with how our brains retain information and what quantity they can retain, and this issue in Trends in Cognitive Sciences. It says, despite the impressive complexity and processing power of the human brain, it is severely capacity limited. Behavioral research has highlighted 3 major bottlenecks of information processing that can cripple our ability to consciously perceive, hold in mind, and act upon the visual world. And they identify these as the attentional blink, visual short-term memory, and psychological refractory period. Not going to go into all of that stuff, but just put these two contrary ideas together. The amount of information is increasing almost exponentially, zettabytes on top of zettabytes. Our brains have limited capacity. Something's got to give, right? And so then it's a question of which information do we intend to retain, or do we retain without intending to retain it? Because we can only retain so much. So we have to kick some out and keep the good stuff. But how do we know what's the good stuff? And that's kind of what we're going to work through. Let's skip that part. Now, C.S. Lewis, who we all love, said it like this: if all the world were Christian, it might not matter if all the world were uneducated. But as it is, a cultural life will exist outside, whether we like it or not. To be ignorant and simple now, not to be able to meet the enemies on their own ground, would be to throw down our weapons and to betray our uneducated brethren who have, under God, no defense but us against the intellectual attacks of the heathen. Good philosophy must exist, if for no other reason, because bad philosophy needs to be answered. The cool intellectual must work not only against the cool intellect on the other side, but against the muddy heathen mysticisms that deny intellect altogether. Philosophy is not optional. If you engage in a conversation on a topic, it is a philosophical conversation. I think some people in the world tend to think, philosophy is just this highly elevated, educational discipline that's just a bunch of smart people talking about stuff that doesn't matter, and that's not what it is. Philosophy at the core helps us determine and uncover truth, and it gives us the tools with which to do that. So when somebody makes a truth claim, I believe XYZ is right, and you say it's wrong, welcome to the philosophical discussion. J.P. Moreland highlights the need, not just for apologetics, but for us as Christians and believers who have access and have attained to the truth to be able to speak that truth. He says, if a culture reaches the point where Christian claims are not even part of its plausibility structure, fewer and fewer people will be able to entertain the possibility that they might be true. Whatever stragglers do come to faith in such a context would do so on the basis of felt needs alone, and the genuineness of such conversions would be questionable, to say the least. This is why apologetics is so crucial to evangelism. It seeks to create a plausibility structure in a person's mind, favorable conditions, as Mackin puts it, so the gospel can be entertained by a person. To plant a seed in someone's mind in pre-evangelism, to present a person with an idea that will work on his or her plausibility structure to create a space in which Christianity can be entertained seriously. If this is important to evangelism, it is strategically crucial that local churches think about how they can address those aspects to the modern worldview that place Christianity outside the plausibility structures of so many. So thank you, or whoever is here from this church, for doing exactly what he is saying we should do. But you all know, I know, more churches need to be doing this. I had an opportunity, I was speaking in Charlotte a few weeks ago as part of a 4-week series that this pastor has decided to do, where I think the first week was Frank Turek, then my friend Adam Coleman, Damon Richardson, then me. But for a whole month, they were being taught and fed this level of content. And we see so much emotionalism that has crept into the church to further highlight and augment the wave of anti-intellectualism that crept in the 50s and 60s. And Dr. Moreland writes about that in this very same book. So the question is, what tools can we employ to be able to discern truth for ourselves and teach our young people, more specifically, how to discern truth for themselves as well, including when, maybe especially when, they're in school, when teachers are saying certain things, teaching certain things. Yesterday, I just got back from a director's meeting in Champaign, and my daughter had her sheet from schools, the sex ed unit is coming up. And I was looking at it, like, all right, well, looks like we had to have some conversations coming up, some more conversations. And the sad part really is, it's not that wasn't gonna happen at some point in our lives. I knew that was gonna happen. I'm a father, I get it, but not this young. That's the issue for me. Why are we pushing these things when they're not even thinking about these things? And so we understand the narrative, and I don't want to go too much into that, but we do need to be prepared as the elders in the room in our homes to be able to give them truth and the understanding of why it's true, so that they can discern better for themselves. So let's lay down some ground rules. First, truth is reality. The definition of truth, there is one, by the way, I know the culture wouldn't understand that. The definition of truth is that which corresponds to reality, right? It's not my definition, it's not a Christian definition, that's just what it is. And we're gonna go into detail on that. Second, truth is not feelings. Those are not synonyms. Have you noticed, maybe last 5 years or so, when you ask somebody, what do you think about this, 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 and this? Well, I feel like, no, wait. I said, what do you think about it? And as quick as somebody says that, they don't even realize that they've stepped outside of the realm we're trying to delve into, because it's just so ubiquitous in the culture. What do you feel? What do you feel? How do you feel? Your feelings are truth. and truth is foundational. When a building has a crack in the window, they can replace the window. They can replace a leak in the roof. But if there's a crack in the foundation, they condemn the building. The foundation is everything that supports everything else we go to, we grow to, we learn. So if we don't understand what truth is and how to discern truth, then it doesn't matter what else information we learn. You can read all the books in the world, but with an improper worldview, an improper foundation, you're going to come to an improper conclusion. Brilliant men. I believe even Francis Crick, I believe it was Francis Crick, who discovered DNA, but he was a proponent of panspermia because of his worldview, because the idea of a God was abhorrent to him. So he's like, well, this is too inexplicable to be accidental. It had to be intentional, but I know God didn't do it. How? I just know. So maybe aliens seeded the planet. And so my question to him would be, so you have no problem with intelligent life, you just have a problem with that being God. You have no problem with an intelligent creator as long as it's not God. This reveals a worldview issue that is causing somebody to look at evidence for truth and make a different conclusion because of a foundational flaw. Does it make sense? So you might have heard this story before. It's about a king, a sovereign, a ruler of some kind, maybe about 2,500 years ago or so, and attempting to show off his great wealth and power and knowledge, he brings this beast in. We see what it is, but no one else knows what it is. It's the first time anyone's seen this, and there's 3 blind men. So the first blind man is brought in. He says, if you can tell me, Mr. Blind Man, what this beast is, you'll get, a certain amount of riches and things of that nature. So the guy comes in, starts feeling around, feels the trunk, and says, oh, I got it. This beast is like a python. And says, no, that's not the right answer. And so the next blind man comes in. He starts feeling around, and he bumps into the side of the animal. He says, oh, I got it. This beast is like a wall. And the next guy comes in, he bumps into the leg, and he says, oh, I got it. This beast is like a tree trunk. And at this point, the king begins to make fun of all the blind men. He's like, wow, you guys didn't know what it was. You guys are ridiculous. You don't know anything. And actually, he also makes fun of them for not working together because they each had a part of the truth. The story is often utilized to show how no one knows all the truth. We just have parts of the truth. You Christians have part, Buddhists have part, Muslims have part. And it's used to push a universalist idea of truth, especially with regards to God and his nature. But there's a crucial point in the story that we need to address. See, the focal point is not the blind men, it's the king. It is the king who sits with an all-encompassing perspective, almost like he's God, which is kind of the point. That only God could have an all-encompassing view, but it doesn't mean that truth can be segmented in that fashion. So the king could see what was true because he had a totally encompassing perspective. So he knew what was actually true. He knew what comported with reality. So let's take that forward and take our understanding of the amount of data and the issues of the day and look at what the publications of our day are saying about where we are. In fact, notably, the Oxford English Dictionary in 2016, as their word of the year, labeled post-truth, that word. Now let's think about the lunacy of this. The book, the dictionary, that is in existence to tell us what words mean, let me say how they define post-truth first. Circumstances in which objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinion than appeals to emotion and personal belief. Now, unfortunately, they nailed the definition. That's where we're at. But this is coming from the dictionary. Now, I want to be clear, they didn't pick this as their favorite word of the year, just picked it as the word that kind of highlights the zeitgeist of the day or where we are of the day. The book that is used to tell us what words mean is telling us that the word of the year is a word that means the meaning of words can change based on appeal to feelings. Think about that. So Now, even the dictionary is suspect. Like, I don't even know. So this could mean this definition one year and this definition the next year. How does anyone live like that? Right? And that's why we're all confused when you look at the news, like, what are they talking about? This is not even the same English language. Second, these ideas do not, as Paul said, occur in a corner. Bad ideas and faulty logic have real world consequences. Right? We see what's going on in Russia and Ukraine. We see fascism and Nazism and all these other things. Ideas don't just stay ideas. Bad ideas eventually come to fruition, and that is the reason that, as Moreland said, we need to push back against bad, C.S. Lewis said, a bad philosophy, because it's literally a matter of survival. But a lot of times people don't see that up front. It's 5-10 years later when we got into this thing and our language has changed, maybe the last few years, right? In about 10 years, I'll say, it's going to start to catch up with us. It's already starting. But when it catches up on a broad scale, you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. And the cat's out of the bag at this point. And until or unless good philosophy combats bad philosophy, that will continue. Third, to say we live in a post-truth era or world is an oxymoronic statement. It's illogical and it's illivable. There's nothing good about it, even if it was possible, which it's not. The idea that truth is fluid or personal goes out the window every time that person goes to the doctor, every time that person goes to the mechanic. They want them to actually fix their car, not just fix it based on according to their truth, right? When I don't want my doctor to prescribe, well, I believe this, this is how I feel about it today. No. What does the scientific evidence say is wrong with me? Give me something to fix that, and only that. When somebody's doing your taxes, you don't want them to, oh, this is my truth. I just believe this is how we should. No. I don't want the IRS coming after me. Please do this accurately and objectively correct and according with objective truth. So it's unlivable because even the people who talk about post-truth or subjective truth don't live that way when it matters. When it really matters, they don't live that way. And you can't. I mean, you can, but not for very long. You'll die a little quicker than normal. And finally, it's illogical because think about this. Now, this is kind of a self-refuting statement. If we were post-truth, and thereby truth is unknowable, we would never be able to know that we are post-truth. You see the problem? It becomes circular and self-refuting. So Abdul Murray said, when truth is sacrificed as the burnt offering on the altar of autonomy, everybody, I want to be autonomous. I want to do me. You can't tell me how to live. It's all about autonomy, thinking that's freedom, and it's not. The resultant smoke chokes the breath out of freedom. Only chaos remains, which ultimately leads to bondage. I didn't put it in here, but there's many studies that show paralysis by analysis. And we just looked at the amount of information that we receive. You talk about paralysis by analysis, you can't analyze all the information we receive. So you just have to either take it or leave it and hopefully analyze it later. But we're all busy and that doesn't happen. And so what people tend to think is that, there's no rules, I can do what I want to do, and that makes me the most free. But Tim Keller said, a fish, if freed from the water, would not feel free. Boundaries, proper boundaries, actually enable freedom, not prohibit it. Now, you could take boundaries too far and go to an authoritarian regime. We're not talking about that. But proper boundaries, godly, biblical boundaries, actually help us to live freely and with more peace and with less clutter in our minds. He did a lot of the homework for us, in other words. Just don't do that. All right, I don't have to worry about that one. No, I won't do that. So now that we've established that truth is necessary, now that we've established there are some obstacles to obtaining truth and keeping the right truth, the question is, how do we determine what is true? C.S. Lewis also said, Christianity, if false, is of no importance. If true, is of utmost importance. The only thing it cannot be is moderately important. You all are familiar with the famous liar, lunatic, and Lord, so I won't go through it again. Same thing. You've got to make a decision. Every person has to make a decision. Now, if you're making a decision between competing truth claims, what discipline are you engaging in? Philosophy. So it's inescapable. Either Jesus lived or he didn't. Either he died and rose or he didn't. Those are the options. Pick and prove and validate your sources. But many people go on the basis of feeling. I just don't believe that. Okay, but why? Well, I just don't. You got to give me some more, right? There's a reason many of my talks, most of my talks, begin with this idea of truth, and this is singularly on this today. My organization called Proof for the Truth, conference Proof for the Truth conference, because if there's no truth, and if truth is not knowable and identifiable, then nothing else matters. It's all speculation, it's all subjective, it's all just your opinion versus my opinion at that point. So this next little part may be a little high level, but probably not. You guys are very well read. So, when I'm speaking about philosophy, I think it was Alvin Plantinga who said, everyone's a philosopher, some people are just better at it than others. It's a true story, I hope it doesn't offend anybody, but we're all talking. If you're talking, you're probably doing some version of philosophy in that talking. So this is why Paul warned in Colossians 2:8, beware lest anyone cheat you through philosophy and empty deceit, according to the tradition of men, according to the basic principles of the world, and not according to Christ. In other words, there is a worldly philosophy, and there's a biblical or Christ-like philosophy. And philosophy means way of thinking or in the discipline of thinking and thinking really hard about something, another philosopher said. So, as they said, philosophy is just thinking really hard about something. It's not just that, but it's at least that. So let's begin with a couple terms that we need to define so we can understand the rest of this. And you might already know these, so it might be just a quick review. Ontology and epistemology. Are we familiar with these terms? Yes, no, maybe so. So ontology focuses on the nature of the existence of a thing itself. So in other words, this is a TV. Ontologically, that's what that is. Epistemology, or from the Greek episteme, is to know. So this is how you know what you know. So the question is, how do I know this is a TV? That's different than what it is, right? Those are two different lanes of understanding. So we have epistemology, which gets us, hopefully, to the correct ontology. But the on-ramps we take from an epistemological standpoint will determine our conclusion, correct? So the goal is to know what to believe. What is knowledge? These terms, truth, knowledge, objective truth, all these terms, these have real meanings, regardless of what society says or has said. So when somebody says this is true, their way of describing the word true may not be an accurate way of describing the word true, because truth is defined not by me as what comports with reality. So you cannot know something that is not true. So when somebody says, I know there is no God, you can't know that. You can believe it, and this is the other problem. Know and believe are not synonyms, at least not from a foundational philosophical point of view. So we're going to walk through that. Alvin Plantinga said, knowledge is, the definition here, warranted true belief, and a belief has warrant for some person if and only if that belief was formed by cognitive faculties that are functioning properly and in accordance with a good design plan in a cognitive environment appropriate for the way those faculties were designed and when the design plans for our faculties is aimed at obtaining truth. Let me simplify. If your brain is working properly, then you have the components to be able to discern truth. But once you have those capacities, there's still a definition of what you're looking for with those capacities. That makes sense. The other part is we can I guess debate if everyone's cognitive faculties are functioning properly. That's a component that needs to be in place, and it may not be for everyone. And I'm not making a jab at people's intellect, but it needs to be considered. So when I'm talking about discerning truth or what is truth or objective truth, one thing we just have to come to grips with is that assumes that truth is the goal. And as Frank Turek says, many people are not on a truth quest, they're on a happiness quest. So the idea that everyone is even looking for truth is not a true assumption, unfortunately. Now they'll say that's what they're doing. But when you give them evidence to the contrary and you give them evidence of truth, and they simply say, no, I don't believe, well, were you really looking for truth or were you really looking for validation? I'm okay with either, just be honest. There's three components in how we determine knowledge. So justified true belief. Have you heard of the justified true belief theorem? It's popularized, I think, by Alvin Plantinga. He didn't create it though, but there's three components here, and they all give us together access to truth, a way into finding truth. So justified is a necessary component in this search or desire to gain truth, because we can't just say something is true and or if one believes something to be true. One can believe something to be true and or something can be true if no one believes it. For most of the history of this planet, people believed the earth was flat. There's still some left out here that believe that. But that belief didn't make it true. However, I will say at the time, they were justified in believing that to be true, even though it in fact was not true. No one today is justified to believe that, even though people do. So justification deals with whether or not you have evidential reasons for arriving at a belief, even if you stumble on a true belief accidentally. And I'm going to further segment this a little bit more. So there's an internal and external justification. An internalist will say, as you would imagine, that all of the justification for a belief comes from the inside the individual who is making the claim. An externalist will say, no, it's factors outside of that person that influence them to know what is true or what to believe. Now, we don't have to make the distinction because Christianity has both. So we have the internal witness of the Holy Spirit, and we have the external evidences of science, history, archaeology, philosophy, and other things. So the justification for Christianity is well established. Now, somebody could push back on that, but we're using clearly defined terms, and they would have to disagree with us on these terms. Second part is truth. Not all truths are established truths. For example, if you flip a coin, never check how it landed. It may be true that it landed heads, even if nobody ever has any way to tell. There is objective truth. And like I said, what is false cannot be known. So no one can say, I know 1 + 1 is 5. They can believe it. I wouldn't recommend it, but they can believe it. But they can never know that. They can never have knowledge of a non-true thing. Truth is simply what corresponds to reality. Brandon Washington said it like this: in any case, even those who profess to deny the validity or the objective reality of the true-false distinction continue to maintain without apparent embarrassment that this denial is a position they do truly endorse. The statement that they reject the distinction between true and false is, they insist, an unqualifiedly true statement about their beliefs and not a false one. You see the problem? So you're saying there is no true-false distinction, but you're saying that that statement that there's no true-false distinction is true. Can't get out of their own way. It becomes self-refuting. Other than that, we have other ways to determine truth. There's a correspondence theory, there's a coherence theory. Do the facts put together correspond to reality? Do they form a coherent understanding of the fact? This happens every day in court. The reality is everyone uses these things. We don't always think about them as though we're using them. But especially in areas where it matters, where people are on trial for certain things, in the judicial system, you have to meet certain criteria. Is there empirical adequacy to sustain what we're being told this person did? Is it logically consistent? Could this have actually happened? Is the timeline ladder? Does this comport with the experiential quantity of data that I have? Have I heard other stories like this? What has happened in history? What have people done? So you put all these things together to be able to get or to grasp what the truth of the situation is. You can't even cross the street without making determinations. So we all use these things, whether we realize it or not, some more than others. We'll say it like that. And then the third part is belief. Now, you can believe something that's not necessarily true. It's the reason I have a job. Every day, people believe things that are not true, right? So somebody's saying, and this is kind of an interesting dichotomy, that people will say, well, I believe, and they'll put so much weight on their belief, which is okay, unless it's unsupported belief. Now, if you have facts and evidence and then get to the conclusion of belief, that's a different story. But what happens often, as Blaise Pascal said, is people often come to believe things based on the what feels attractive to them. So having tools for being able to discern truth is highly, highly important. The general idea behind the belief condition is that you can only know what you believe. So failing to believe something precludes knowing it. It means full belief, outright belief. So somebody saying, they can't say, I know God, but I don't believe in him. That statement wouldn't make any sense, right? Or I believe in God, but or there is a God, but I don't believe in him or believe he exists. It doesn't go both ways. Those types of things would be unfounded or unwarranted beliefs. Now, even if you didn't understand one thing I just said, what you should take away from this little brief philosophy class is that there are tools. Truth is not arbitrary. Truth is not just how you woke up that day and how you feel or what laws are made or not made. That's not truth. That's not how we determine truth. In fact, we assess those laws based on the fundamental aspects of how we come to know truth. We have to have, as C.S. Lewis pointed to, a third or a higher moral law to judge the ones we come up with. And that's the one that's objectively true. So how we come to know something, epistemology, gets us to the ontology, but how our epistemology about God can either get us to the ontological reality that God does exist and his nature is what we believe it is, or that he doesn't. And that starts with how we engage in the task of discerning truth. There's rules to this. I didn't make the rules up. These aren't Christian rules. This is just what the philosophers have agreed to and through the centuries have figured out. This is how we figure things out. I believe in high school, we should be teaching intro to philosophy, just so people know the three fundamental laws of logic, the law of non-contradiction, the law of the excluded. This is basic knowledge that people need, especially our kids. Now, the other reason we need to know this is because there's so many fallacies, and this is not the complete list by any means, but this is what we see every day. Turn on Facebook right now, you'll find one of these. An ad hominem attack is attacking the person instead of the argument. False dichotomy, putting two false choices up when there's really a third choice that's true. Circular reason, we understand. Red herring, throwing something into the conversation that has nothing to do with what we're talking about, right? And thinking you won the conversation or the debate. So these things are floating around. Our kids are exposed to, they don't know all the terminology, but if we give them tools on how to discern truth, they won't have to know. They'll be able to spot a lie when they hear it. So what does all this mean for us as believers? How should our understanding of truth be lived out? And most importantly, what does Jesus teach us about truth? Brandon Washington again says, if you're reading this as a Christian, I can honestly say that what you believe is true. But as an apologist or a believer, you are to discover and delve into Christianity's evidences and rationality. Arm yourself with justification for your faith. Doing so will allow you to convey knowledge instead of blind hope. Knowledge is epistemologically superior to hopeful speculation. There was a day, my grandma's day, I'm just believing, I'm just trusting, I'm just waiting until I get to heaven. That worked for a generation. That worked before social media. That worked before the internet. And I don't think that it worked is a good enough standard, but it did. But it's not working now. Our kids, us, the culture, we need more. And the great thing, you all know this as being part of Reasons to Believe, there's so much evidence. There's so much evidence. I sometimes think God is in heaven saying, what else do I have to do to prove it? What else do you want? There is more evidence in support of the New Testament documents, in support of the resurrection as the best theory for the empty tomb than anything else. If we look at the quantity of manuscripts, everything else pales in comparison. We have a abundance of riches, yet people don't want to believe. Because at the end of the day, for many, it's not a head issue, it's a heart issue. And so my job, our job, is to put a pebble in somebody's shoe that they get so uncomfortable with that they look for a solution. Because at the time when they confront the reality of the lie they've been living, that will be earth-shattering for many in some cases. And we hope that that will lead them to the ultimate truth, which is God and his word. Now, earlier I explained the difference between ontology and epistemology, and this does play into the nature of Jesus. And you're going to see this, and you're going to see it in a different way every time you read this from now on. Jesus makes an ontologically unique statement, the likes of which has not been made before him or after him. That's a big claim, right? Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." We've read this, quoted this so many times, I don't know if we've paused to think about this. Every other prophet, every other guru has claimed to have special access to the truth, but no one claimed to be the truth. In other words, Jesus is saying, I'm not just more knowledgeable than everybody else, I'm a utterly unique individual. And it also means that even religions that precede Christianity update their doctrine and their texts once Jesus comes on the scene. There's something that everybody in antiquity and to today, well, maybe not today, has noticed about Jesus and the uniqueness of him. That even if they're not Christian, they know there's something utterly unique there. That if everybody could live and did live as Jesus did, the world would automatically be a better place, even if people don't believe in Christianity. So when Jesus says, I am the truth, he's not just saying he knows more. He's not just saying he's a really smart guy. He's saying he is ontologically more than everyone else. He's not saying he has access to something. He's saying he is something. Jim Warner Wallace, in the book Person of Interest, says, even if every New Testament were destroyed, we could still reconstruct a lot of information about Jesus from the scripture and statements of competing religious systems. The result would be an impressive and robust description of Jesus, and it comes from non-Christian religious leaders and believers. If you wanted to remove any trace of Jesus from human history, you'd also have to scrub the scriptures and statements of religious people all over the world. These non-Christians consider Jesus a divinely wise teacher, a model of morality, a sadhu, an achara, a bodhisattva, a guru, manifestation or prophet of God. Jesus matters to billions of religious people, even if they don't claim a Christian identity. Add these numbers up. Hindus, Christians, Buddhists, Muslims, Baha'i, Ahmadi Muslims. Add that to the 2.3 billion Christians. Now we've got 2/3 of the world, almost 6 billion people. So the idea that Jesus isn't known or hasn't been preached or people are unaware it doesn't seem to comport with the data. But all those people don't believe in him. And perhaps, maybe not, but perhaps if we present better justification or they had seen it or could see it, they might believe and not just believe that he existed. The way I want to encapsulate this and to think about it is that when we talk about truth from a Christian perspective, only in Christianity is truth not simply a concept, but a person. Truth is not just a concept, it's a person, which means to know the ultimate truth is to know the ultimate person. It also means Jesus was the truest man to ever live. And if our foundation, as we established, should be truth, and I think most people, even the people who disagree with us, would say that, I want to establish my life on the truth. Well, if Jesus is truth, and he is supposed to be the foundation, building on any other foundation will ultimately get you to a different conclusion. It makes perfect sense logically. But it's also why this statement that Jesus said, you will know the truth and the truth will make you free, makes so much more sense. You will know not the concept of truth, you will know the person who is truth, and that person will make you free. It also puts this conversation into an interesting light. The conversation Jesus has with Pilate I'm going to skip through the first part, but he says, he's asking him, are you a king then? And Jesus answered, you say rightly that I am a king. For this cause I was born, for this cause I come into the world, that I should bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice. Pilate said to him, what is truth? And when he had said this, he went out again to the Jews, said to them, I find no fault in him at all. What is truth? He didn't even stick around to hear the answer to the question from the one person on the planet that could actually answer it. So I guess this false search for truth is not a new thing. We see even in the Bible, he says, what is truth, and doesn't even stick around to hear the answer. Even if he didn't believe Jesus knew the answer, you asked a question. So again, when people say they're searching for truth, we have to always take that with a grain of salt. But eventually they will be, and we want to be there for them when they come and ask. Jesus, the Bible says about Jesus, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory as of the one, the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. And so as I close, I want to talk about how we should live in light of the truth, in light of the one who was truth and what he taught. In other words, how do we connect our orthodoxy and our orthopraxy? And orthodoxy is right belief. Orthopraxy, we could say, is right action. So if we have the truth, we have the right belief, what should we do with it? And I would say truth compels action. You all know, we all know, there are too many nominal and or lazy Christians. And I'm a pastor, so I can say it. If more people who have access to the truth simply told that truth, more people would know the truth. It's not rocket science. And so George MacDonald says, to give truth to him who loves it not is to give him more plentiful material for misinterpretation. So look, it can't be based on if they want to know the truth. And that can't be based on if they're going to twist our words, because they will. I have a YouTube channel, as many of you know. Sometimes I look at the comments, rarely, but or at least the negative ones. And I can tell this person just wrote this. This is like their standard response to every Christian YouTuber or whatever it is. And I'm like, within the first minute, I addressed this very thing you're talking about. So I know you didn't even watch the video. That's okay. But if you did watch it, you might learn something. And then we won't have to deal with the misinterpretation. The most dominant current creed is to live your truth, right? I refer to this as the Oprah phenomenon. So everyone has a truth. It's problematic for several reasons. First, if it were possible for each of the 7, I think now 8 billion people on the planet to live their own truth, how many truths is that by definition? Right? Which ultimately means there is no truth. If we all have a different truth, then there is no truth. I know we won't all have a different one, but even if you put them in like 10 different groups, whatever it is, that's too many. So it's not to say that we should argue about whose truth is right. We should use these tools that we just discussed to figure out and examine and line them all up. Line up Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, Christianity, line them up, use the standards we have for determining truth and see which one rises to the top. Sorry. So there are those in we'll call it the live your truth camp, who have undermined their own paradigm, because the mantra must now become live your truth as long as it doesn't bother me. And so the live your truth faction has produced a self-appointed, morality police, I guess, that monitors the rest of us and decides who to cancel and who not to. And if we don't fall in line to their collective truth. But where then does this moral standing find its grounding? See, the main problem with naturalism or atheism, to me, is that nothing is attached to anything. It's, as Francis Schaeffer said, the feet firmly planted in midair. Okay, what are you attaching your moral standard to? What are you attaching the origin of the universe to? What are you attaching meaning in life to? We just believe okay, that's great, but it's not grounded, it's not attached, it's not tethered to anything. And so it's just nebulous, and therefore everyone can kind of live their own truth or their version of it. Brandon Washington again says, Believing that something is true while simultaneously rejecting the existence of truth is the equivalent of wholly resting your weight upon a crutch while sincerely denying the existence of crutches. I like that. Think about it, though. It's like you're holding something and denying it exists. And this is the lunacy that we have descended into that is going to take some work to crawl our ways out of. But truth is the foundation of everything, and there are agreed upon methods, as I've discussed. I feel does not equal I think. And if the goal is to arrive at conclusions regarding ontological realities, how we arrive at those realities, epistemology, does matter. If justice, for example, is an ontic reality, it's a real thing, which is to say it's rooted in a physical, a real, a factual existence, then the truth about justice and what it means matters. The same is true for love and a bevy of other terms that get thrown around today. Love is love, right? I said, okay, great, it is. Define love. No one can define it. So you put the sign on your yard and there's words on it that are small words and you can't even define them. So is love love? Yeah, tell me what love is. Now there's a biblical definition. I think that grounds it for us, but there is no worldly, agreed upon definition. Some will say it's just your brain and they reduce it to the chemicals. But we all know that that's an insufficient explanation. Even those who are not aligned with the live your truth can fall victim to a society which bolsters loosely defined terms and phrases. Because when people attempt to redefine terms such as love, justice, others who seek to keep those terms rooted in their etymological foundation can at times become unloving or unjust. So we've got to watch on both sides, but at least if we're understanding the tools that the Bible gives us, that philosophy gives us for discerning truth and for comporting ourselves in a Christian manner, then we can understand how to put those two things together. And in Charlotte, part of the talk was on the humility of apologetics. So we all are familiar with 1 Peter 3:15, right? The apologetics verse, so to speak. But I think there's not enough time spent on the front and back end of that verse. So the verse says, always be ready to give a defense for the hope that is in you with meekness and a good conscience. And to give a defense is the Greek word apologia. So that's where we get apologetics. Great. But the first part of the verse says, sanctify God in your hearts before you give an apologia. And then give an apologia this way, with meekness and a good conscience, not screaming at people, right? Not yelling at them, not blasting them on the internet. And so I know it's frustrating, trust me, I get it, but we have to comport ourselves in a way that allows the truth to be heard and internalized. And not like this. Secondly, Christ compels action. The atheist, W.E.H. Lecky, said, the character of Jesus has not only been the highest pattern of virtue, but the longest incentive in its practice, and has exerted so deep an influence that it may be truly said that the simple record of 3 short years of active life has done more to regenerate and soften mankind than all the disquisitions of philosophers and all the exhortations of moralists. An atheist was able to recognize, regardless of what we believe about the religion, like, I find no flaw in his life. If you only look at it from a secular point of view, Jesus and Muhammad, there's no way you'll pick Muhammad if you know anything about his life. I'm not gonna go into details because they're kind of gross. And that's not me trying to bash anybody. That is recorded in their text, in the Hadith and all the other things. So I'm not just siding with one thing. But my point is, even atheists can look at a person, a historical person, a real historical person named Jesus, and say, man, this guy was amazing. Regardless of if I believe he's the son of God or not, he lived an amazing life. Even Gandhi said, you Christians look after a document containing enough dynamite to blow up civilization into pieces, to turn the world upside down, to bring peace to a battle-torn planet, but you treat it as though it's nothing more than a piece of literature. Whew, it's a heck of an indictment from somebody who's not a Christian. And I can't really say he was wrong completely. But he was also not completely right. If the truth of what Gandhi saw and the person of Jesus compelled him to act. And for those Christians, for us who have intellectually and spiritually ascended to a relationship with Christ and thereby knowledge of the truth, yet are not compelled to act incarnationally in a world increasingly devoid of truth, is to abdicate our most important responsibility. For any parents, for any Christian of any kind, because we've made this as a specialty task, apologists, but we're all supposed to be on some level apologists with whoever we talk to. And if we abdicate that space, part of the reason I'm even on YouTube is because we can't cede that enemy to the territory. It's the biggest online territory, if you will, that exists. So we have to push back in the enemy's camp, so to speak. Because if we don't, we just give it up. And it's like C.S. Lewis said, our uneducated brethren have no defense but us. Not to say we're smarter than everybody, but we've put in the work lives, we read, we've studied. So we do that not to say how smart we are, but to help those who need the help, right? We must speak truth. The night before his execution, Jesus prayed in the high priestly prayer and said, sanctify them in the truth. And he continued, I do not ask that you take them out of the world. I've sent them into the world. Just protect them from the evil one. Sanctify them by your truth. Your word is truth. In other words, Jesus was saying to his disciples and to us, take your orthodoxy and demonstrate it through your orthopraxy, and thereby change the world. For Jesus, propositional truth was never divorced from practical application. It was never either or, it was always both and. And so we can't just say, just preach the gospel. We have to preach it and live it. So we can't just say, just look at the evidences and stop there. No, we have to take the evidences to their conclusion to get people home to Jesus. So the application of what we know matters almost as much as what we know. And perhaps if the church was collectively more intent on being active and speaking truth to power, we could, as Gandhi said, turn the world upside down and bring peace to the battle-torn planet. And my hope and my prayer is that we would all know the truth, practice the truth, preach the truth, so that what we practice is heard, seen, and most importantly, felt. Amen? Thank you. All right, so at this time, if there's any questions.
Yes, let's go ahead and open it up to questions. We have a few people here in the room, and we have a few people out online. And I think I'll go ahead and start us with a question. Oops, I'll turn on my video too here. So, Alex, so thinking about this from an apologetic standpoint, we talked a lot, you talked a lot about evidence, right? Give evidence for what you believe.
Yeah.
And I find that a lot of times when I ask people that question, right? So where's your evidence for that? They'll say, well, I was watching a TV show or a YouTube video and they said such and such.
Yeah.
And my response is, well, that's not evidence, that's a claim.
Yeah.
Somebody made a claim.
Yeah.
How do you know that claim is true?
Right.
And do you know the difference between claim and evidence? Mm-hmm. Now, the truth is, I kind of am not real articulate in explaining the difference between a claim and evidence. But I think it's an important distinction to make. Yeah. So my question for you is, do you agree with that? And if so, do you have a way to distinguish between a claim and evidence?
That's a really good question, because anybody can make claims. People make claims all day. And unfortunately, it's so easy now with the internet. And sometimes claims take off because of the internet, because depending on who makes it, it gets shared 20,000 times and now it's truth. So claims and evidence, I mean, very simply, claims don't require evidence, but evidence will lead to claims. So if I would say, I was talking with actually Hugh Ross, I think one time about this, that I think some people think we bring the cosmological argument, the teleological argument, and we're trying to make science fit the Bible. It's not what's happening. If I never heard of the Bible and you just showed me all of the cosmological, teleological evidence, my first question would be, who did that? Not what. what I didn't say earlier too is when we're talking about truth and we're saying, what can be true, if we're just talking about the 4 fundamental laws of physics or the 3 laws of logic, we can say what is truth. But the question that Pilate asked should have been, who is truth? And so I said, why should it have to be who? Because when you talk about moral and ethical claims, we're always talking about persons. And if there is a moral truth, it has to be from a personal source. It's the other reason that the universe can't produce a moral law, as Sam Harris might say. So what are they attaching the claim to? Now, you got to be prepared that they might just be lazy and they're never going to look for evidence. So that's just how some people are. But if you use certain questions, and I think you don't have to always know the answers, use certain questions. Greg Koukl wrote a book called Tactics, which is a great book. And 3 questions that stand out from there is, what do you mean by that? I saw such and such on the internet and they said this and this and that. And okay, so what did they mean by that? What do you mean by that? Explain it more. And usually they can't. Second question is, how did you come to that conclusion? I guess you could ask them, how did the person you're watching come to that conclusion? I don't know, so you don't know what you really mean by what you're saying. You don't know how you arrived at that conclusion. It's not a good starting point. The third question is, have you considered? So now this is the point where you push back. And so I think sometimes we push back too quick and it becomes a fight, but allow people to dig their own grave. Ask questions until they realize, I don't know what I'm talking about. I was serving with RZIM at the University of Florida, and they had this board in the middle in the campus center, and it was like, who is God? And it had different things, and is man basically good? And does life have meaning? It had all these things, and you had this string, and you're supposed to connect the dots and form your worldview. So a young lady on campus was like, this is mine. So I'm just talking with her, not trying to, stump her or anything, just start the conversation. I said, okay, cool. So walk me through what you did here. And as she talked it out loud, she said, this doesn't really work, does it? But nobody had ever asked her to define her worldview. She's in college at a great school, but that's not their issue. They don't care about your worldview. So she had never been challenged on it. And it was a soft challenge I made. I didn't say anything. I was like, just tell me what you did. I didn't say anything. So I think sometimes if we ask the right questions, people will come to a conclusion like, I guess if I do believe that, I can't believe this, but I do believe that. And they'll start working through it. And it may not be in that moment, in that conversation, and maybe they'll go home and sleep on it and think about it. And like the next week you see them like, you know what? I was thinking about what you said, and I either have more questions or I've made a change of mind. But we have to be patient with people and allow them to arrive at the conclusion without us kind of forcing it. Because if they get there on their own, they'll stay there. I don't know if that answers your question all the way.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, but claims are not evidence, but evidence will produce claims. It's the proper way to produce claims. I'll put it like that.
Oh, very good.
Yeah.
All right. How about other folks?
Yes, sir.
I got 2. The first one is multiple times, and I'm not sure if I was trying to figure out, was it a mistake on your part or not, but you had a picture of Eric Mason's book, Urban Apologetics, but the quotes, you kept saying it was Brandon Washington.
So Eric Mason's the general editor for that book and the sequel. And so different people wrote the chapters.
Okay. Okay.
But it's a great book, and so it's more culturally contextualized apologetics, because there's stuff that like I deal with, atheists like we all do, and but there's we call them black religious identity cults, like Hebrew Israelites, Kemet, Conscious Community, that I also have to contend with. So it's like I'm fighting on all fronts because there's craziness on all sides, and it's hard to keep up. But it's a great book to just learn more about Nation of Islam and all those different things.
Okay.
The sequel that just came out, Urban Apologetics: Cults and Cultural Ideologies, is also great. And they go into Jehovah's Witnesses, prosperity gospel, a bunch of other things that are seeping into the church today.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, and this kind of goes along with that, and plus your shirt also adds something to it too. I like the exegete part there too. But even within the church, there are some groups that put more emphasis upon education we need our leaders to be educated.
Yeah.
And there's other denominations, groups who say, no, they just need to be led by the Spirit. And to my feeling, a lot of times they're just using the Spirit as I'll say whatever I want. I feel like this, and so I'll just use it that way. But I just wonder if you wanted to talk about that a little bit within the church.
I think you're onto something. Listen, I know God can speak and does speak, and there's times where I know the Holy Spirit's led me and spoke to me, or spoke to me, always leading, but speaking. That's not every day. And actually, if it was, I don't think I could handle it. Even Moses came down off the mountain. So I don't think the only way God wants to communicate truth is the Holy Spirit just downloading directly to you. And I think that's very dangerous because of what you said. Because then in a religiously charged environment, somebody can say that, especially with a certain title. Spirit said this to me. Who am I to challenge? They're the pastor, the evangelist, or whoever. And that's not the way to discern truth. The other part is, because biblical literacy is so low currently, that people don't have even the internal structures within our own faith to discern truth. That's a bigger issue, because if you don't know the word for yourself, I can quote anything I want almost and make you believe it because I said it and I have a title. The other thing that's interesting is, there were no chapters and verses in the Bible until the 13th and then the 16th century. So for the majority of the history of the church, they didn't have that benefit. And I don't know if it's even a benefit today. It might be a gift and a curse, because now it's so easy to isolate and eisegete, the opposite of exegete, a text, because you can pick your scripture and it has the word you want, but taken out of context, it doesn't mean what you want it to mean. So we in the church need to have biblical discernment as well as this philosophical discernment that I'm talking about, because truth is truth and all truth is God's truth. So discerning truth will never take you away from God. So there's the other part in the church that fears, or at least I don't know if they fear it today, but there 50s, 60s, 70s, there was a lot of the church that feared this, what they viewed as an intrusion of philosophy, and that's worldly stuff, and we don't want that in the church. It's just how to think. That's all it is. And also the idea that apologetics was some new thing. It's not. We have the earliest writings were apologists, like Tertullian, Irenaeus. Like that's what they were writing. They were trying to write to the emperor to explain Christianity so they would stop killing them. That was basically the reason. Like, stop killing us. This is what we actually believe. This is what you think we believe. Please, stop. So apologetics has always been necessary and always been used, and it's not a new thing. It might have like a new kind of wave of popularity currently today, but it's not new, and it's always been necessary. So the other thing I'll say to your point is, I did a video one time called "Apologetics is Not Optional," and like I said, we tend to think, okay, you're the apologist, that's what you do. Okay, sort of. But the Bible never made that distinction. Peter was writing to the church, to Christians, to every one of them, and telling them to give a defense. We look at throughout the Bible, Jesus even gave evidences when they said, are you the one? John the Baptist was in prison. Are you the one? Should we look for another? Jesus could have said, man, he knows who I am. That's my cousin. Like, what are you talking about? He baptized me. He didn't say that. He said, tell him this. Evidence 1, evidence 2, the lame see, the blind, right? He listed some things as criteria to say, based on these things. Jesus said also, if you don't believe the words, like the fourfold witness in John 5. So this is not new. Even Jesus gave evidence to prove and validate who he was. So why today would we be against that? Now, I understand, see how I can say this. I've been told by some people that some pastors may have an issue with something like this coming in because they feel undermined or not at that level, and therefore will feel embarrassed because of it. I could care less. I'm trying to help people know Jesus. I don't care about the accolades and I don't know why anyone else would, but if you're willing to put your people at a disadvantage as their pastor, simply to save face. Pick a different job. I don't know. That's how I mean, I don't understand if we're all working together. I'm only an asset. I'm not trying to, and I say we're not trying to take over anything. I'm here to help, and I'm on to the next one to help wherever else I can, as we all are trying to do in our own gifts and talents. And so if we all work together, the church wins and the world wins, actually. But unfortunately, there are some who, rather than put the hard work in, it is a lot of reading, and everyone doesn't need a degree, but we need more information, and the information is available. Why not use it? God bless people to be able to research, and Hugh Ross, right, 50 books or something. I mean, why would we not read that? Why would we not take advantage of that? I don't see how that can ever hurt. And so it does take a lot of work, though. And I think some are just, it's easier. Spirit gave me this. I don't have to go read 10 books. So that's the unfortunate reality.
All right. Well, we have a question from the chat.
Oh, yeah.
And the question is, how can the church, us Christians, position themselves so the claims of Christianity are plausible?
So like back to the J.P. Moreland quote, by asking the right questions. So I remember one Good Friday, I was doing something on an examination of examining all the theories that explain or try to explain the empty tomb. Here's the irony, just saying that way. The fact that we're talking about an empty tomb is already an admission on the non-Christian side. It's a big admission. And Gary Habermas notes that 75% of people engaged in studies of history and ancient Near East culture and those things, 70% of all worldviews acknowledge the empty tomb. The question is, how did it get empty? So now we can look at the biblical text and say, okay, there's guards there. They didn't guard every tomb. Everyone couldn't afford a tomb. So we know exactly where the tomb is. We know it was the only one guarded, or at that time. There's a stone, it's sealed. We know the setup. So for it to be empty, just off the top, to me, seems miraculous. But let's examine. Let's just, for example, so was it the swoon theory? He was not fully dead on the cross. This is kind of the Islamic view. He was half dead, buried, and then he kind of woke up in the middle of the night and pushed the stone away and got out. But there's no talk of a bloody, beaten Jesus walking through the streets of Jerusalem. Remember, he was beaten almost half to death before the cross, right? There was no medical doctors that were healing him inside the tomb. So unless he was miraculously some kind of superhuman, either way, it's a miracle, because this guy was beaten half to death. Okay, the disciples stole the body. Well, that doesn't work, because you wouldn't be willing to die for something you know is a lie, where you're hiding the body in the room and you know he's not really who he said he was. Go through all the theories, the conspiracy theory, the mass hallucination theory. There are no such thing as a mass hallucination, right? It's an impossible phenomenon. So if I just look at every theory they put forth, and then I look at the resurrection theory, and Dr. William Lane Craig in his book, On Guard, goes through this and says, okay, there's criteria, right? Not our criteria, philosophical criteria. Is it plausible? Is it less contrived, less ad hoc? Does it have explanatory scope? Does it have explanatory power? These are the tools that every historian uses to determine the truth of a historical event. When you use those tools and you examine every theory, including the resurrection theory, only one stands up. So at that point, whether I want to or not, I have to go where the evidence goes, unless my worldview says I can't go there. And now I'm forced to uphold. You've heard so many brilliant people uphold the mass hallucination theory. That's the one they think is the most plausible. But there are at least 8 recorded sightings or meals even with Jesus and other people, different people. So did they all hallucinate different days, the same thing in the same way at those moments on different? Come on. So that just reveals where somebody's heart is, regardless of where their head is. At that point in the conversation, it's back to your point, we have to know when to bow out. They're not ready yet. We planted the seed, we put the pebble in the shoe. That's as far as it's going to get today. Because if they're still supporting a mass hallucination theory, they're not ready to talk about truth. right?
Very good.
I think you had a question.
Go ahead, Doug.
We admire Christian thinkers like C.S. Lewis and Francis Schaeffer. But you find it ironic that we admire them so much, we quote them, and I certainly quote them too. But I just find that very few people follow them in doing serious thinking like they do, because if we did, we would have more impact on issues like healthcare, climate change, poverty, race relations, immigration, gender confusion.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And this kind of goes to my point about the orthodoxy and orthopraxy is once you know all the right answers or information, so to speak, what do you do with it? And I think to your point is excellent, is that C.S. Lewis recognizing, okay, how do I call this thing unjust when I have no idea what just is? And so he's getting to the moral reality, which gets him to God. But then he goes back and says what I said at the beginning. Now, if our uneducated brethren have no defense but us, we got to go defend. We got to go do something. And so to your point, the activity of us or those who have the truth needs to increase in a way that's in line with the information we have attained, if that makes sense. That, okay, we know C.S. Lewis and Plantinga and all these different ones, so we say what they said, and hopefully many of us do live, not necessarily as they live, but based on the things that they in the Word says. I don't know that, well, it's not that we're modeling our life after C.S. Lewis or Schaeffer or anything like that, but they can help us see Christ better in some instances, or see God better and see the Christian worldview better. Now, a church can help us implement those things we know. And I think that's part of the purpose of the local church. That is say, okay, we gather like-minded believers, give them information, now let's go. Let's go out. And one of the things I love to do, I'm a very boots on the ground type of person. I teach and speak in Cook County Jail a couple of times a month. I like being in non-conventional Christian places. So you read I formerly worked for Marketplace Chaplains, and that's literally an on-site chaplain at businesses. So I was a chaplain at a grocery store and at a hotel. Just you wouldn't even think like, why are you there? That's the reason I'm there. Because I want to be where non-believers are. So if more people, more Christians, just put yourself in different environments, put yourself in environments where you know you're not going to be the majority, or your position, your worldview, your belief is not going to be necessarily accepted, but stand tall in that environment and drop a pebble in everybody's shoe and let God do the rest. But you make an excellent point that we can't just be knowers of the word, but we got to be doers.
All right, we have a follow-up question from online. It says, most people, their beliefs help determine their truth, but beliefs can be wrong.
Yeah.
And so how can we proceed to challenge those beliefs, but do it with respect and humility?
Yeah, this is the issue of the day, right? Because you say anything controversial online, or not even controversial, you could think it's benign. I made a post, I thought it was a joke. It's the only time I've ever gone viral. So it's weird, this internet world. But if it's face to face, and I think that's the best way to obviously do these things, or on phone or something like that. Asking questions, I'm gonna come back to it again. As Pascal said, people invariably come to the base of their beliefs based on not what's true, but based on what they find attractive. So that's not necessarily inherently bad, as long as we're aware of it, as long as we're aware that that's what's happening, or even what I'm doing. And then if I'm aware of it, I owe it to myself, at least, to go check my own beliefs. Now, in this conversation, that's where that's happening. So I think it was Bob asking, if the person is saying, oh, I believe XYZ, I believe XYZ, ask, so why do you believe that? It's a fair question, I think. And for me, at least, if I believe something, I should be able to articulate why I believe it, especially foundational beliefs. To just say, I don't believe in God, and then walk away, like, okay, why not? I don't know. This is the biggest, I mean, regardless of what you think, it's a huge question, because you get this answer wrong, when you fail that test, it's not like an F. It's a pretty big consequence. So it's at least worth thinking through. And people think through what car to buy, agonizing for weeks, test driving, going to different dealerships, what house to buy, going and driving to different, and you should. What college? We agonize over so many decisions. What restaurant, right? But when then it comes to God, I don't know, it's not a big deal. What? What did Tozer say? What you think about God is the most important thing about you. So regardless of if somebody believes or doesn't believe, I at least admire and respect those who engage in the dialogue. I mean, I don't agree with Sam Harris or Dawkins or any of these, but at least they thought or kind of thought about it. But just to be flippant about it. Our culture, somebody asked, how do we reach the quote unquote happy atheist? That's the kind of, which is a category that did not exist up until like 70 years ago. This is relatively recent for people. Huh? The happy atheist, quote unquote. The person who's just content with just not worrying about God. They're not even asking questions where you can have the conversation, right? They're just content doing life, and it almost have to be like you forcing the conversation because they're not thinking about anything. But with that type of person, you look for, if you have a relationship with them, something will happen. Something will happen in their life, on the news, a topic will come up, you'll be talking about something will come up, and it'll be a good entrance point. Something on the news, and they'll say, that's immoral. Oh, why do you say that? How do you determine a moral standard? How do you determine yours, right? Now it's a natural entrance into the conversation. But we have to, so Jim Warner Wallace talks about, we want the home run. I want to come to Mr. Non-Believer and tell him in 2 sentences the gospel, and he's like, oh, I give my life to Jesus, right? That's the ideal way we want it all to happen, and it never happens like that. So he's like, you don't have to hit a home run, you just got to get on base. All of us here, I think, you didn't come to believe the first time you heard the gospel, or maybe even from the first person you heard it from. Maybe you did, maybe you didn't. But somebody planted a seed, and someone else a couple years watered it later, and then someone else said something a couple years later, and you're maturing through this time, and you're going through life, and all these things coalesce, and eventually you're like, okay, I'm ready, I believe, I accept Christ. So we can't look at our work in getting someone to salvation as too low or too high. If you are the one that gets them home, don't forget someone else got them on base and got them to second and third. So you're no more special. On the flip side, you're no worse if you're the one that gets them on first base. And I think the genius of God is so we can never take pride in it. But Paul says, if I boast in anything, I boast in him. And guess what? We will boast. And some Christians, unfortunately, do boast. Come to my event, everybody gets saved and everybody gets healed, right? And we can clearly recognize that's not Christian. But we have to be louder about that because the world doesn't know the difference. And you probably feel like I do. When you see a Christian doing or saying something so foolish, daggone it, now I'm gonna have to answer for this. And I didn't even do it, right? It's not your fault. But that's the problem when we're just led by the Spirit only, and not ever by biblical theology. So I think it's a case-by-case basis. I don't know if that fully answers your question, Bob. But asking the right questions and allowing them to uncover or expose themselves is the way in, I think. And I think that's the best way to reach those, especially those who fully believe their beliefs, even if there's no justification. And if you can find a way to slip in justified true belief theorem, maybe you don't want to call it that, but just the idea of justification, that's a good thing to do. Because you could say, hey, I just heard this the other day, it's good to have our beliefs, but our beliefs have to have justification. Have you heard that? just make it like you just thought of it. But beliefs come and go. Beliefs can be founded or unfounded. The question at the end of the day is, what do we have justification to believe?
Very good. All right. Well, with that, I think we'll go ahead and wrap up. Let me
All right.
go ahead and
Thank you.
close us out in a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for all that you've given us, for the intellect and the logic and the reason that we can use, both to understand you, but also to engage in the world. Lord, we thank you for Alex and his ministry. We ask you to continue to bless his ministry and continue to bless us as we, take these ideas and principles and knowledge and use it to, further your kingdom on earth. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.
And thank you, everybody, for joining us. And we hope to see you all again next month, second Saturday in October.